Warm welcome to all of you to this SMF, a different kind of webinar on medical legal aspects of hospital practice. It involves all of us and concerns all of us, and we don't get any formal education or training in various aspects of how to deal with the medical legal aspects of our practice. So, with this in mind, in this webinar, even though it's only of 1 hour, 15 minutes duration, we will try to put in and discuss as much as kind of webinar, which will pave the way for future discussions and maybe more webinars in the future and so on. So I am Dr. Murli Ariga. I am of the IT department. To all of our audience and other members who have joined in to this webinar. There are this and other specialties listening in. We have eminent panelists today in today's webinar. Professor Obi Nandimat is the teacher and faculty at the National Law School of India University at Bangalore. A very well-known teacher and a very prominent and most sought-after speaker in many of such forum. And we also have Mr. Vivek, and he's an excellent speaker, and he would speak to us regarding the medical records, and he is the head of the medical records at Sundara Medical Foundation. Mr. Sudarshan is a leading practicing advocate at the High Court of Chennai and is also the legal advisor for Sundara Medical Foundation. Other panelists, we have Dr. P.V. Jayashankar, who is our medical director and head of orthopedics at Sundara Medical Foundation. We also have Dr. Ravi Shankar, who is the chairman of the National Legal Cell of the IMA and a very prolific and very prominent figure in medical legal circles and in IMA also. He is also joining us as a panelist. Welcome, Dr. Ravi Shankar. And we have Dr. Nirmal Frederick, who may join us. He's actually in the airport on his way to Goa, so he said he will join us. He's a very active member of IMA, president of IMA Tambram, and the vice president of our Ophthalmic Association. He has varied interests from journals to publications to finance and now aspects of practice as well. Welcome him. And of course, we have Dr. Vijayalakshmi Seshadri, Gynecology at SMF, president of the Obstetrics Gynecology Southern Chapter Society of India. We also have Dr. Ganesh Kamath, who is a senior consultant urology at SMF and also the president of the Urology Association of India. So with this, of all the panelists with us, I request Professor Nandimat to begin his first talk. You can share your.
So thank you very much, sir. I hope you are able to see my slide. Are you?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can others be muted, please?
I think now it is very clearly visible, right, sir?
Yes, sir.
Oh. So I just would like to thank you, all the organizers, and particularly Dr. Murli, for thinking of giving me this opportunity and to make a small presentation. And the time that is allotted to me is just 15 minutes. I think I will be able to, say whatever I have slated to say as far as this particular topic is concerned. And the topic that has been assigned to me is avoiding litigation in medical practice. But let me just tell you, I have only 2 slides to make my presentation, and I would strictly abide by the time that has been given to me. And say, when we talk about avoiding litigation, we as lawyers use it in two ways. That is what I say, litigation avoidance has got a dual meaning. The first one is, it is an attempt to avoid any possible dispute or litigation itself. Let me put it this way. Can I try to avoid the disputes altogether from arising? This is what we call as preventive litigation strategy. If we can able to do it, then nothing like that, because you don't have to really think of a situation where you have a dispute or you have gotten into a conflicting situation with law and things like that. On the contrary, or on the other hand, it is also mean to say avoiding going to court to settle the disputes. Because going to court of law would mean costing you in terms of time, costing you in terms of money, and it also drains so many other resources, including the hampering of personal relationships, so on and so forth. That is why we generally try to say whether we can avoid going to that adversarial system of dispute resolution or going to the court. There, ADRs, that is alternate dispute resolution mechanisms, have emerged as solutions. So we generally try to look at these two dual meanings when we talk about litigation avoidance. But let me flag it up at the very outset, ladies and gentlemen, that I would be talking only about the first one, that is attempting to avoid any possible disputes or litigation cropping up altogether. And maybe some other opportune time, I should be able to talk to you about the alternate dispute resolutions or ADR mechanisms, how they can be adopted into your domain of practice, so that you can avoid, to an extent possible, going to court of law and settling your disputes. But before I proceed any further, I just would like to highlight this, saying that there is a belief, if you believe me or if you take me as an authority on this, I always say, if not more, there is always 1/3 of a chance of you avoiding the litigation, provided you are conscious about this. Be it business, be it with regard to your practice, or be it with regard to any of the situations or scenarios of life, there is always a possibility of 33.33% wherein you can avoid any possible litigations from cropping up, provided you are conscious of the fact. And that is what I try to apply. Those principles, what we talk, we can apply. But let me also say, you may probably put it back to me saying that, sir, you are talking of 33% or 1/3. That means there is still a chance of 2/3 of litigation. Let me tell you one thing. When you are working in a civil society, we all live in a civil society, as you know. So one of the price we need to pay is one of the price we need to pay is to litigate when it becomes inevitable, because court has got compulsory jurisdiction on all of us. And wherever, I'm challenged in the court of law, it is my bounden duty to defend myself in the court of law. It has nothing to do with your right attitude, wrong attitude, etc. If somebody just walks against me to the court of law, then I have to necessarily walk into the court of law and defend myself. But these kind of scenarios, to a great extent, that is approximately 1/3 of such situations, you can avoid. And believe me, if you are conscious, this 1/3 of avoidance is going to hugely and immensely benefit you in your day-to-day life. That is the most important or the critical part I wanted to start with. Then the second very important point here, this is the only slide which would take remaining part of my, what you call as discussion. How do you avoid a possible dispute, especially with regard to medical practice? These are the only 4 points. This is not a rocket science. I always say awareness with regard to fundamental legal framework is absolutely important. And it is the first baby step towards avoiding any possible disputes of the future. 3 points I would like to stress. Point number 1, you all know, because you all are doctors, if I'm allowed to use the doctor's strategy, if you are, what you call as diabetic specialist, you generally want your patients to know bit about diabetes, so that when situations go out of control, they at least know how to assess that situation and run to the doctor. Similarly, every doctor is supposed to know bit of fundamental legal framework so that he can confidently interact with the society and his patients. This is one very important thing. The second point here where I always try to mention is, today, if you really look at your curriculum, that is medical curriculum today in India, you don't have this module included into your curriculum at all. That is why after their 10+2, whatever they must have studied during their high school as civics, they absolutely lack, appreciation of legal systems in which they are working. That is why it is absolutely essential for the doctors to know fundamental legal framework, which they have not been imparted with when they are undergoing their medical, what you call as school, endeavor. The third one, the last one is, you can't afford to say, oh, it was never taught to me or never taught to us, so I don't know what is needed to be done. You need to probably do your own way, this awareness campaign. How you can get this awareness campaign, whatever that is required to be done so that you can get it, you need to do that. This is the first very simple point I have for, your notice. Ladies and gentlemen, the second point I have here is using law as a tool of decision making. I have one of, I can probably say an elderly friend to me, or a colleague of mine, Dr. Ravi Shankar, among the panel. We always try to talk about that. There are two ways how law can be used. One is, law is used as a tool of litigation. That is how lawyers are trained in their classroom. When I get into the well of my classroom to teach my own students, whichever subject that is assigned to me, I try to teach them to use the law or use law as a tool of litigation. That means dispute has already a reason between the parties. They are in loggerheads in the court of law or elsewhere. I try to represent them and try to win the case for them. So this is what I mean by using law as a tool of litigation. But what we need to do is, we need to use the awareness or fundamental legal framework awareness to use law as a tool of decision making. This is art by itself. It is very difficult for me to explain it in one go. But if you are told, or if you are, given that kind of an awareness as to how you can understand that law can also be used as a tool of decision making, so your decisions are going to be more tenable, more transparent, and you would be more confident in defending yourself in the court of law in case it comes to that. That is the second very important point. The third one is continuous capacity enhancement for leaders. Here, I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm confining it to start with the leaders. Suppose if you run a hospital, or if you have a hospital where there are about 3 or 4 verticals of specializations, and each vertical is headed by one medical doctor, and they are the leaders who are absolutely, it is necessary for them, absolutely necessary for them to have some kind of continuous capacity enhancement. What does it mean? Law, we always say, is quite organic. Whatever laws you had a couple of years back, they have transformed themselves. Whatever law you had earlier is also not, changing today. And whatever laws you have today would certainly undergo a drastic change tomorrow. So that is why we call law is an organic process where laws keep on changing. We say this is a dynamic bodies of law, and their interpretation starts every new judgment by the Supreme Court and High Court. We call them as constitutional courts. The law changes. At that time, you have to keep abreast with those changed, circumstances of law. That is very much essential for the leaders, and that would help them in fine tuning what I can say the internal processes. And by fine tuning the internal processes, you can certainly prevent or avoid any possible disputes in the future. And the last point I have on the slide is something which goes beyond mere avoidance. Continuous credible legal support. You can take it from your advisor, or you can have your lawyers in house, or you can probably source it out to an agency or organization. It is always essential that you need to have continuous and credible legal support when you are taking some kind of a policy-based decisions at your organization. This is going to not only prevent litigation in the future to a great extent, in case you land onto a situation where litigation has become inevitable, these are the people who know the internal circumstances better, and they are capable of defending yourself best in the forum. We have seen the best of the lawyers have failed to produce results. This is what with case studies I teach in my class. The best of the lawyers who are deployed, the most expensive lawyers, they have failed to produce results because they don't have complete feel of the organizational SOPs. But suppose if you have a continuous legal support, the person who interacts with you continuously, and he also knows how the organization has grown over a period of time, he would be better able to help you out in the case of crisis. So these are the 4 very important points I thought I would share with you with whatever limited time that was given to me. One is awareness. Second one is the attitude of using law as a tool of decision making. Third one is continuous capacity enhancement for the leaders and continuous and credible legal support. But in theory, it sounds very simple, but you need to integrate this strategy into your own organization or organizational level. And that integration over a period of time will hold you in good stead when it comes to any sort of a disputes or situations in conflict with law, what I say. Once again, I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity, especially Dr. Murali and others. So I would be too happy to answer any questions, but I don't know what exactly is the format of the transaction. I hand over the baton to the organizers and see how they would propose to proceed further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nandimath. I think in your usual way and so typical and so very clear understanding of the subject, I think we are able to make out that what you're saying is very, very true, and what you say will be very much applicable to all of our practices in medical issues as well as our routine day-to-day practice. Being aware and being continuously aware, not to back away is what I think is some of the messages which you have conveyed. We will take up the next 2 talks by our records officer, who's head of medical records, Mr. Vivek, followed by Mr. Sudarshan, also who's our legal advisor at SMF. Following these 2 talks, we will have a panel discussion involving Dr. Ravi Shankar and our SMF doctors team as well. So I now invite Mr. Vivek, who's head of medical records at SMF, to talk to us on the importance of medical records in avoiding these kind of medical legal issues.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my screen. Okay, I'm going to talk mainly related. All of us would know about the importance of medical records and its legal implications. So I'm going to stress a little further on that and finish my presentation. I think I have a few more slides. So let me start. So I'm going to start with a few statements from people who have been involved in law cases, lawsuits, or anything like doctors, insurance managers, and lawyers. So this is a statement from a pediatrician who says that nothing is more devastating to an innocent physician's defense against the allegation of medical malpractice than an inaccurate, illegible, or skimpy record, except for a record which has been changed after the fact and therefore inevitably compromises the otherwise defensible case. So, which comes again to the point, medical records needs to be documented correctly to avoid litigation. Another statement by a law, it's a general statement for like any lawyer who defends medical practice can regale you with stories about claims and disasters that could have been easily prevented by more careful attention to the patient's chart. The principal problem is usually the absence of data coupled with a failure to know the treatment recommendations conveyed to the patient and or the need for follow-up appointments. Another statement from an insurance manager, claims manager is, have been involved with the defense of physicians in professional liability claims since 1976. And he states that one common thread that has existed in all claims seen over the years is that the medical record is the physician's greatest asset in defending him or her against allegations of negligence. If more physicians realize a clear, legible medical record is the best defense, and they document it accordingly, most claims would never be bought, and many claims that are contemplated would not be pursued. So this actually again brings to the point where how important documentation is, how they actually back up the doctor's defense. So even though we know what medical records is and how important, I'm just going to make another statement. I'm going to read it out. So medical record documentation is required to record pertinent facts, findings, and observations about a patient's health history, including past and present illness, examinations, tests, treatments, and outcomes. The medical record documents the care of patient and is an important element contributing to high quality care. And why is it important? Again, it communicates between doctors and other healthcare professions providing care to the patients. It's also used for collecting health statistics, legal matters in court cases where their records are used, and for claiming insurance cases. Again, a few statements are like weak medical records as an invitation to litigation. Complete, timely records offer physicians a strong defense. Always sign and initial all chart entries. Avoid unexplained cross-outs, write-overs, and squeeze-in entries, because records are the ones that goes as evidence to support the doctors for the defense of the doctor. So if the record is not proper, something it looks out of if it creates a doubt, then that is where the problem arises. They say you have tampered with your record. So everything has to be done as per legally. So that is where they say avoid unexplained crossouts, write-overs, or squeezed in entries, things like that. So again, document significant phone conversations with date, name, and content. Also document informed consents, discussions very carefully, and also document informed refusals that you have informed them, but they have refused for that particular treatment or a diagnostic test. And again, document patients' non-compliance in the record. If we have asked them to take this medication, follow this diet, if they have not done that, everything has to be documented.
Before the filling of the list, so they ask for like a text every Friday.
Audience to mute themselves while the speaker is on. Speaker is speaking.
Again, 5 important emphasis has to be done while documenting records, which is accuracy, relevance, completeness, timeliness, and confidentiality of records. I'm going to talk a little bit only on timeliness and confidentiality. So there are specific time requirements for completion of certain records, forms in the records. An initial assessment, history and physical form has to be completed and signed within 24 hours of admission. Post-operative note has to be written immediately following surgery. Operative notes can be dictated or written and signed within 24 hours of the operation or the procedure. And the complete medical record must be completed within they give us 7 days, but we usually ask them to complete and return them to records within 2 days after discharge. Again, another statement is documentation reflects professionalism and competence, which includes legibility. Legibility is something that has been an ongoing thing. From the SMS point of view, recently we're seeing lots of our registrars doing a very good job. Sometimes when I believe when it's the end of the shift or when they have too much of workloads, they try to write it fast, and that affects the legibility part. This is an example where this is not from SMF. It's just I took it from Google, where this kind of a writing in a record, which happened to be a medico-legal case, attracted fine to a few doctors in Lucknow, where they were actually charged, fined 5,000 rupees because the judge could not read what was written on the file. That is why we stress on the legibility part. Again, here they had written a critical alert result. These are quotes from SMF documentation, where the person who has noted down the critical alert result has not done it in cap letters or something that another care provider or the doctor who's seeing the record after that can read it out. So these are few examples. I'm going to give you out examples of things that we find in record that might implicate us in the future if it goes as a legal case. That record has to be submitted in a legal case. Again, physicians should never place themselves in a position of having to defend a medical record alteration, which is because we always results in a fine, like the price, there's a price to be paid. So again, a documentation, if it's not done, the procedure or whatever care was given is not done. That's a statement, like a fact that happened, like happens when you go to a court and you say, oh, I've done all this to this patient, I've given all this care, but you have failed to document it. And the lawyers and the judges will only look into documentation. If you've written it down, they would accept it as, okay, it's done. So again, there's another statement. Coming to confidentiality, it requires all healthcare providers to keep the patient's personal health information private unless the consent to release information is provided from the patient's end. Medical records are confidential, protected by the authority of the Privacy Act of 1974, its amendment and the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Again, doctors and healthcare providers are asked not to leave patients' identifiable information on your computer screen or exposed in your work area. Shred papers containing patient information that is not relevant to medical documentation. Don't talk about patients or families in hallways, elevators, or in public places, and do not release medical record information without the patient's consent. And the common deficiencies we find in records, and if these are not, actually medical records do find them, and we track those deficiencies, and we ask the doctors to complete them. Just in case before that there's a legal case and implications done, these kinds of deficiencies would actually go against the doctor who's been accused of malpractice or something. So usually why we find in records are notes without date and time, no signatures. If signatures, there is no identification of who has done it. It should be followed with the registration number. There are incomplete forms, history and physical. The initial assessment form is incomplete. The procedure note is incomplete, not signed. Progress notes are not done on a daily basis. Orders are not seen. And again, consultation forms are not complete. These are the usual deficiencies that we find. I'm going to show you a few screenshots. What has happened? This has happened in the recent discharges in last week in records in SMF. So here, the documentation, the doctor has not written the complete date and time. He has just written 27/7. So that again, there is no year there, there's no time, and the doctor has not signed. This is one deficiency that might legally implicate us in the future if it happens to become a legal case. Again, consultation forms are not completed correctly, whether it's an urgent, a priority, a routine case. Who has requested it? Well, is it an opinion, co-management, or takeover? The reason it's not the doctor has requested it, not signed it, but the doctor who has been asked to do has completed his part, but the requester has not done his part. And patient's signature is missing in this form. They have explained everything. If this goes into legal, the patient would point blank refuse to say, yes, I was not informed about it. I had not signed the form. I was not informed, but everything would have happened. In the real case scenario, it would have happened, but documentation is what is required when you go on the legal side of it. So again, this is another deficient form. Again, a patient has been sent for CT. The doctor's signature is missing here. When the patient can't sign, our consent forms have an option where consent from patient representative. Here, the patient's representative is signed on the part where the patient has to sign. The reason has not been explained. So these are the kinds of deficiencies that we find in medical records currently. What we do is we track them, we notify the doctors and the nurses, and we make the record complete within a time period that has been stipulated in our policy. So that's what is happening right now. Electronic health record has been happening. We have started the outpatient medical records electronically, where the doctors, when seeing the patients in the OPD, are doing the entries in the system. IP is on the process where the admitted patients' entries are also expected to be entered in the system using tabs or laptops or computers. That is in the process. So there are lots of software programs. We have Shivam actually to support us with this electronic health record, which is the future plan in the electronic EHR process. And again, the Privacy and Data Protection Act, I believe our next speaker, our lawyer, Mr. Sudarshanan, will explain more on it. So it's just the Information Technology Act, how it's been protected, how data has to be protected and all that. That's it. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Vivek, and sincere thanks to you for highlighting so many of the defects which we voluntarily or involuntarily, or so-called lack of time and lack of attention to small details, we do keep missing out these signatures, and we scrawl and scribble, and doctors are famous for their illegible handwriting and so on. I think you have clearly pointed out all the issues, and we really have to start the process of correcting ourselves. So physician, heal thyself. We have to start with that process of correcting ourselves before we find that somebody else is going to find our mistakes. So I trust and hope that this would increase the awareness among ourselves, our junior colleagues and our registrars and other associates to embark upon improving the way we do medical records. We will of course discuss this after Mr. Sudarshan's talk. Yes. I now invite Mr. Sudarshan to talk on a very important aspect of our practice. And increasingly, we find dissatisfied patients who are not unable to pay, or for whatever reason, the explanation of the treatment or the diagnosis or the management is not explained to the patient, and they turn violent. And they turn violent particularly against our staff and, of course, our doctors as well. And this is becoming quite common. We see it in the media very often. I'm going to ask him to request him to speak on this for the next few minutes, and then we'll have a panel discussion involving the speakers.
Very good afternoon to one and all. Thank you for this opportunity. First and foremost, from my side, what I would emphasize at this junction is, it is all now interrelated. First speaker spoke about avoiding litigation. The second speaker spoke about maintaining the records. And I am going to speak on the violence against the healthcare workers. So in this regard, one is overlapping the other, which leads to the last one. First and foremost, what I would suggest is the prevention, the medical term prevention is better than cure. So why this situation has come now, of late, people have now had this awareness as to why there are so many violences, or there has been attack on hospitals, healthcare workers, and there has been attack on various other, in social media. They are even carrying wrong messages, and untrue events have been displayed, and they portray in such a way that your image is tarnished. So under these circumstances, to the best, the law legislators, there is an act, Epidemic Act 1897, still which has been in force. We all along it is, of course, it is not, a lot of people were not aware of what this Epidemic Act is all about and what would be the consequences for the healthcare and for the doctors, the precautions, what they should do. We go to a normal circumstances, a person would reliably estimate or understand that if he goes to a hospital, he gets a treatment, and the treatment diagnosis is so for which what has been prescribed is been followed. But now, of late, after this, especially the past 2 years, when this COVID situation arose, there seems to be a lot of news reports and all that there has been attack on the healthcare workers. So the law is now trying, especially when the population is more, the health sector, to the best what they can cater to in the given circumstances, and what is best possibility, what is the best infrastructure. See, what is a human expectation is, when I go to an hospital, they are supposed to give me the best care, and they are supposed to make me understand where I stand. And the infrastructure is what they're expecting. It should be to the level where there should not be any drawbacks or glitches, so that in the course of treatment, something goes wrong. You might have come across where in certain places where they find that generators are not there, so the oxygen cylinder doesn't work. There are other point of water stagnating on some hiccups, which leads to all these problems, and which turns into where the patients became, the attenders become violent, or the news media or the well-wishers of the patients, attenders, they come and try to attack on the hospital and the healthcare workers. In this regard, what I would first talk is about prevention. The second aspect I would say is, in case if such situation happens, how to tackle the situation in a cordial manner, or which could lead that to diffuse the situation. See, first situation I would say is prevention is where the health sector should have its primary object, where in all aspects, where the hospitals should try to avoid that situation should not happen, where they become violent or where they raise their voice. See, violent means it can be physical, or it can be by word of by abuse, by words, by uttering by increasing your speed, like you create like how you, in certain cases where they shout and they cause a lot of inconvenience to the other patients. So under these circumstances, what hospital sector should take as a primary object is how far to diffuse the situation and how far to avoid such situation. So from the point of healthcare workers, they all should, I could use the word well informed. If a patient comes, proper counseling is done, and they are made to, the attenders or the well-wishers of the patients are made to sit and explain the situation. And periodic counseling is what I would, in most of the cases, they say, we were put in dark. Nothing has been informed to us. And we did not know this is a seriousness. So these situations tend to create a situation where the attenders or the well-wishers turn violent on the hospital. So to diffuse the situation, I would only say properly handled. For example, I can only quote some cases where in certain cases, why hospitals turn violent. Basically, one they feel is on the treatment charges is one important aspect which every common man has got a grievance, that they charge so much, but they don't give us proper treatment. Or they say charges are so much, they don't get, it's like, actually strictly speaking, it is not a contract or an agreement where I pay you money for the money I get, for the money, the services what you render. Healthcare, medical profession being a noble one, the primary object is how to save the patient, or how to, the course of line, the prescribed line of treatment to the patient, what is important for everybody to understand. As the previous speaker said, even a layman, because this what, and you'll be having the knowledge, but you can't expect a layman who comes. So therefore, patients and their relatives or attenders should have the knowledge as to what they are being done, and proper counseling is what first aspect, which would say prevent, so that the issue doesn't get escalated, and it is always maintained in a level which is cordial. So to maintain that, so the main precaution to be taken by the doctors and the healthcare workers is they should be cordial, number one. Their examples of nurses or the attenders or even the liftman who operates the lift, all, or who carries the food, or the assistant who are associated with the treatment aspect, all should have the cordial, first aspect is the cordial respect for a human. If those things are all followed, that escalation, that violence towards health sector would be minimized, is my first aspect which I want to emphasize. Of course, with regard to the law aspect, I even have a write-up. I'll just share it, how I've just culminated what would be the violence against healthcare workers in what all aspects, what would be the aspects for like proper counseling, even for the health sector workers, when proper training to be given. First and foremost, how to handle a situation when it becomes out of control. Somebody would have had, it's all basically on emotions. A person comes to the doctor with a belief that the doctor is God, and emotionally they get attached, saying that the patient will be treated and what the patient will be sent back home safely is what human expectation. In all these regards, when the healthcare hospital and the people associated with them, if they cordially, there will be in some cases where they will react, in some cases they will accept this is the reality. But that emotional attachment alone is what every person, healthcare sector person, should handle. While handling that situation, what are the precautions to say, like where a patient is treated and proper care is given, and in spite of best efforts, there seems to be the end of the person is being the eventuality. Under those circumstances, what would be the consequences and how it should be dealt is one aspect. Now, with regard to this, when last COVID, when this COVID pandemic time, the government enacted and amended the act to make it more strict. They have enacted the amendment in such a way that it is not easy. A person who creates a violence will be dealt severely, is what this amendment has come in now. A person who comes and attacks a healthcare worker, or he obstructs or from discharging the duties, the act has been enacted in such a way that it can go up to 7 years imprisonment and the fine up to 10 lakhs. All these amendments have been brought. The central amendment has come in last year, and the state amendment also has been brought. Now, Tamil Nadu state government has introduced a state amendment extending up to 10 years in case of any where somebody when healthcare person is attacked by the common public or the attender or whoever it is. So, in fact, the fine has been levied now in certain cases up to from 50,000 to 2 lakhs, as far as the central government amendment is. Now, the amendment for the state government, it comes from 1 lakh to 5 lakh, 3 months, starting from 3 months to 5 years, up to the period of 5 years imprisonment. And the state amendment says from 6 months to up to a year of 7 years. All these amendments have been brought, but this is not highlighted to a common man. I would not, an ordinary layperson or a common man who comes would not be aware of all this. This is the second stage. When something happens, your hospital had to react by filing a complaint before the police authorities and make it as a criminal offense, and then proceed under the due process of law and getting them punishment. But would that be a salvation or a solution from the health sector point of view is a big question mark, because the procedures are elaborate. It is not simple, and the trial, lodging of FIR, arresting a person, moving the filing of charge sheet, providing them the documents, footage, because the violence would be, somebody would be record the violence, and there will be some witnesses who are witnessing the violence. They have to come forward and give evidence in the court of law to establish that on a particular day these things have happened, and therefore that person has committed an offense, causing grievous hurt or causing damage to the property. Even damage to the hospital property is a grave offense under this now amendment, which has now been tabled. So be invited is a big question mark, and if it comes, is the second how to deal with it. So under these circumstances, what could be the training? The hospital could give training, periodical training, even call us at certain place at certain times. You can even call the psychiatrist who can console or who can come and give counseling to the attenders in a manner which it is understandable to them, is which has to be seen from the health sector. And periodical training, and there should be sufficient, the guards, or you should have the hospital should be provided in such a way that every portion of the building or every place where there is where the hospital attenders are interacting, everything, all should be monitored periodically. And once in 3 months or once in 2 months, all the healthcare workers, right from the level where you have different levels of healthcare people, nurses, lab technicians, then people who take tests, pathologists, like that, in various aspects, everybody should be given some counseling to say how to handle a situation when the situation goes out of control. So proper training is one, and most important aspect is when an accusation is made against a healthcare worker or an hospital, how best to diffuse it and calmly deal with that manner. And that particular aspect, that art, would only come by way of proper training. And you should not, from the health sector aspect, you should not provoke or create a situation where it would lead to a worse situation. To undergo a counseling and training and the patients are properly informed in all aspects, so that there is no violence created, and avoid a situation where in some places you say they are rude. Those aspects should be avoided, is my second aspect which I would like to emphasize. The write-up I have given, I will just share the write-ups, which will also be helpful to all your.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for highlighting all the important points with regards to violence against health workers. And I now welcome Dr. Nirmal Frederick, who has joined us just now. And he is the Vice President of the Tamil Nadu Ophthalmic Association, as well as the IMA President of the Tambaram branch. And of course, we also have Dr. Ravi Shankar, who is the chairman of the National Legal Cell of the IMA. Of course, one quick question to Professor Nandimat before we start the panel discussion. What is your take, sir, Professor Nandimat, on the violence against health work? We have listened to you so many times. You have been our teacher for the last year, and we have listened to you on so many aspects of violence, confidentiality, consent, and various aspects of medical legal practice. What is your take on violence against health workers, and what is the best way to deal with this situation? Professor Nandimat? Yes, Dr. Nirmal and Dr. Ravi Shankar, you can give in your opinion regarding this violence against health workers. I think you're all seeing a lot of violence and a lot of media publicity about hospitals being attacked, health workers being attacked, and so on. What is your take on that?
Thank you, Murli. Thank you for, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, clear.
Yeah. Thank you, Murli, and the organizing team for inviting me for this wonderful webinar. Sorry, as a question, the prevention, I think, is the best solution from our point of view, since most of us are medical professionals and healthcare professionals. We should start with prevention before looking at the other aspects. So I think the previous speakers have already dealt with so many issues related to medical documentation, counseling, communication, and the consent process. And it's almost look like NABH assessment report for me, hearing those talks. One thing is have standards in place, train all the staff, and also have important crisis code at your institution. So the code brown or code gray, how they call, in case there is violence against health professionals, how to react. So most of our people are not taught in a crisis situation how to react, whom to inform, whom to escalate the situation, etc. They tend to escalate the situation at the last minute to the law enforcing authorities. So it becomes difficult. The second one is the strong association with the local bodies, local associations and regional associations. Like IMA, I think all the hospitals should be part of the nursing home board and also other healthcare associations to have the bonding and also some help in need. Most of our hospitals are small hospitals. We may not have the security and systems in place. We need to, at crisis time, we need to reach out to the support group and associations. And third level, I think Dr. Nandimat and the last speaker have already dealt with the legal solutions that we have to escalate to the government and law enforcing agencies.
Thank you, Nirmal. Dr. Ravi Shankar, your opinion.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. I'm quite surprised an institution of SMF cadre, which is a benchmark, is forced to talk about violence against healthcare workers. I think this is one of the institutions which set an example on how you have to train your people and how a quality work and how a communicative work is being done. In spite of it, every one of us were talking about how we have to introspect yourself and try to make it perfect. But then there is only one issue that comes in when there is a violence against hospital. It is money, and that money not communicated and not able to understand the reality of the patient's health and how they are going to recover or if they are not going to recover. That is the only issue. It is communicating the sick of the patient. It is communicating the cost involved. If that is being done properly, I think people will understand and take it forward. In spite of it, if they indulge in violence, it is only not to pay the bills. This is the experience which I have the last 20 years. Everyone has talked about how to prevent it and how to go about it and all these things and how the law is all. I'm one of the person who was involved in getting the Medical Establishment Protection Bill in the state of Tamil Nadu. I know it was enacted only after a doctor was assaulted at Tiruvallur, slapped on his face for a problem that had happened in a casualty, and he lost his tympanic membrane before the law was enacted. So violence against doctors, because people are more aware now, and they expect the medical community and the hospital to provide them the ultimate care, cure, and get the patient back to their home. That's our over expectation and a little bit of our poor communication. And they always talk that the hospitals are making money, which is not the truth. SMF is talking about violence means that it has to be given very, very big importance. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for from you. I think we really have to pay attention to the preventive aspects and all the aspects of the means the protocol setup diffuse the situation of the cold blue kind of acute medical emergencies. For these kind of emergencies also, I think we should address, keep it in place. Dr. Vijayalakshmi Seshadri is here. She is the senior consultant and head of the obstetrics gynecology southern chapter. And I would request her input on this. And with regards to what she thinks is the commonest, particularly in her.
Thank you, Murali, for inviting me, and thank you, SMF, for having me here. I think we have both gynae and obstetrics, and when we talk about gynecology, we know it is at par. I mean, it's just the problems are the same as in other medical specialties and all the surgical branches, where we do have sudden issues on the table, and there is a disparity between what we explain to the patient and what is the patient's expectations, and whether we have taken proper consent. And on the table, when we have to change the turn of events, whether patient is well prepared to accept it. And quite often when the patient is under anesthesia in any surgical branch for that matter, whose consent is valid when we have to take on to an extra procedure or further down. In gynecology, of course, the additional problems are with the infertility, which can ensue on, with the hysterectomy, which needs to be done when we did not really think about it, or there is always kind of an experience of a big hemorrhage that sets in, and then we have issues regarding to that. Whether it is a laparoscopic or an open surgery, I think the problems are the same: injury to the nearby organs, and more so with the ureteric problems. And of course, Ganesh is there to talk about it. But then I think these are the problems which can always happen in gynecology, and that becomes a big issue. So whether we can take consent or a blanket consent saying everything can happen on the table or while we are treating is another issue. Now, as far as obstetrics is concerned, we all know that there is a lot of indefiniteness. There is a lot of nebulous atmosphere which hangs on. Patient comes with all expectations after the 9 months care. And now that we have taken on to lots of investigations, ultrasound, regular monitoring, so much is the expectation of the patient that we should not go wrong. Whereas it is really not possible, and there are windows of dark, this imaging, there are problems with acute perfections, problems with real reportings, and also problems with whatever we can diagnose or predict. So how much can we predict and how much can we have an insight into an issue before the patient goes in for delivery? And while we are always convincing that we can have a normal delivery, of course, with certain issues which can switch on to cesarean, this expectation gap also becomes a big issue in certain patients. And then when we move on to the cesarean, again, the complications which happen, or whether we are going in for an instrumental delivery like forceps and vacuum, injury to the baby, injury to the mother. So how much can we explain to the patient in the time of emergency, and how much can we prepare them much ahead before we shift them into under our care? And then once we go, then again about the fetus, the fetal demise is always very, very shocking, very difficult. We have caught up with lots of situations where suddenly you will have to explain why at all did the fetus go, whereas we never really expected, and they are not definitely able to take it. And we know it is very, very hard. And then also the maternal problems which can come on because of the load of the pregnancy. So I think the pregnancy loss and all, we are all optimistic. We want to do the best, but then there is every possibility that things may go wrong. We are no more in an era where we can say it is the act of nature. We just can't help. We are at the mercy of the God or anything. They want clear answers, because the more and more we are trying to convince them that we are monitoring, we are taking care, the more their expectations come from us. And then it is really hard where from, and can we really take a blanket consent as the patient gets in, that delivery or else cesarean or else losing a uterus because of the hemorrhage and all those things. And then many conditions happen where sudden events take a different turn, like eclampsias, antepartum hemorrhages, and all those issues. So there is a big list of uncertainties. And I think we need to really think how much we can predict, how much we can prevent, and how much we can convince the patient that these could be a little different despite all our efforts and sincerity and commitment. Thank you, Murali.
Thank you, ma'am. And Dr. Jaishankar, I think you've been listening in silently without saying anything.
No. It's not that I got interrupted, but it will actually.
I know it's a very absorbing situation and
spoil the flow of the entire,
Yes, sir. Your input, sir.
In fact, every talk requires some kind of questions, even to our lawyer and everybody. But that will take a long time. So that's why I just kept quiet. Anyway, I thank first Dr. T. N. Ravishankar, who has been with SMA from the time it started. I'm glad he is there.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
He is one of the experts in this particular field. And if you allow him to talk, he can talk for the whole day. I think ideally when we come next time, instead of speaking in general, we can take very specific issues. That will actually help us to understand all these litigations much better. And if you say in orthopedics, I don't know how many of you know, the number of cases that is pending in the consumer forum in India is orthopedics number 2. So imagine the amount of cases against orthopedic surgeons. And in globally, orthopedics comes somewhere around 5. But in India, the number of cases that we are in number 2. I don't know who is number 1, whether it's Obs and Gynae or
Obs and Gynae.
I think that I expected, because whatever the reference I took, it only says about orthopedics. And mainly, we deal with trauma. Most of the time, we see this patient in the emergency room. The majority of the time, litigations are out of your rapport with your patient. Okay. In a normal situation, in an elective case, your rapport is very good. You see them in the outpatient, you see them in the ward, you explain everything and all that. But in an emergency situation, when the patient is in the emergency room and the rapport is not very good, most of the time that leads to many litigations, because he's not sure, he's not understood what you say. And many times the patient's relatives also don't understand what we say. And many times, all of they'll all ask in a very serious injury where it is life is in danger, they'll come and ask you, in spite of telling that, sir, you would all come, all surgeons would have come across this, who deals with emergency situation where the life is at risk. They'll come and ask you, in spite of telling, in spite of sending the consent, They sign the consent. I don't think they read the consent at all. And then they listen what we say, that but they don't want to hear from the doctors the life is in danger. So this is a common thing we all, face. And mainly in orthopedics, there is a survey done by the American Association of Orthopedics. They say the orthopedic surgeons, they say they're not very friendly and they're not sympathetic towards patients. There's another observation they have found. That's why one of the reasons there, the number of, litigations against orthopedic surgeons are more. And in orthopedics, complications are more visible comparing to other specialties. When you have a deformity, when you have a non-union, when you have malunion, somebody is limping, and you take an X-ray, it's all seen. So there's a lot of visibility of your suffering in orthopedics, and that may be complications of the injury itself, but they all attribute to your treatment. Even the complications of the injury or sickness, the patients attribute to the treatment. That's another problem. Even when you go to court, I have this thing, the judge is very sympathetic towards an orthopedic patient who comes in a wheelchair or using a crutch, as if we have done the problem, because he is actually coming in a wheelchair because of his problem. This is a comment by one of the lawyer, who's a lawyer is arguing for us, and he says, so the sympathy goes to something like that. So orthopedics is always in a very difficult situation as far as the litigations are concerned. And if you just say in our specialty, the commonest injury which we come across litigation is a nerve injury, whether it's upper limb when you operate radial nerve, or in the lower limb, it is the common peroneal nerve, where the patient ends up with a wrist drop or a foot drop. That may be transient. So if you don't get the patient into confidence that this can happen and document, okay, this can happen, then you'll be in trouble. If this drop to recover itself takes about 6 months. So it actually puts a lot of work before operation than during operation. I think we are in a unique situation where we need to communicate better, communicate documentation. These two things are actually probably mantra. You communicate well and document well, in all situations like this. And again, in upper limb and lower limb, and also spinal surgeries are another area where there is a lot of complications. So you have to really, to avoid all this, I think you need to qualify well, and then also always practice evidence-based practice. What is done most of the situation in a particular problem, you execute something which has been proven in that particular problem. Don't try to do something new and get into problem. So these are all the various things, and then communicate better, document better, and especially in a polytrauma situations. I think especially in the polytrauma situation, and you are the leader, and you are one of the team members, you're also the team of plastic surgeons, neurosurgeons. There's another area I have seen we get into problem, because everyone has to take important, something. Suppose the patient is with me and there is something, a neuro problem or a plastic surgery problem, patient is only talk to you. So as a leader, if you're the patient is with you, you see that all other your team members also talk to the patient, document better, and then see everything is documented well. I think these are all in general. I think that I should tell about orthopedics. So that's about.
Thank you. So I think we have Dr. Ganesh Kamath here as well, and your take on all of this, Dr. GK.
Good afternoon to all, and thanks, Murli, for the lovely initiative. I just want to add a few points to what has already been said. First of all, as physicians, we should not guarantee a successful outcome. That is extremely important, because medicine is a field which is dynamic. As you engage the patient in diagnosis and treatment, there are several things which one has to be open, you have to explain to the patient. Second thing is identify the person who is the caregiver and who's going to take care of the patient, and provide all the possible information regarding that patient to this caregiver. very often what happens is after a surgery, for example, in a stone surgery, one is not able to remove the entire stone. One stone is left behind for some technical reasons. You have to, at the end of the surgery, call the patient's attenders and tell them, identify the person who's going to take care of this person who's responsible, and tell him, look, this is what has happened. This is the reason why it has happened. And this is what is the plan in the follow-up period. And document that in your discharge notes. What can invariably happen is patient goes home under the understanding that the stone has been removed. And then after 3 months, he goes to another physician with colic, an X-ray or an ultrasound is done, and they find a small stone there, which is causing the problem. So it is quite possible that the other physician, by mistake remarks that there is a stone still there despite the surgery. So this is a common point where a legal action can be taken for the previous surgeon because he has not done the job effectively. So this is another area where you have to explain very clearly. Whenever the outcome is not satisfactory, kindly explain to the patient and to the caregiver what is the proposed line of action. The second area which is of concern is in emergencies. You can never assure that by doing a procedure, you will save somebody, because there are several factors in operation in a septic patient which is not under your control. So it is important that when you do an intervention, you are trying to keep the solution. Further care is provided by the intensivist. So as a team, one has to take the confidence of the caregivers and tell them, this is the first step. Here afterwards, we take care of the other critical factors, and then we will deal day by day. So that is the second situation. The third is infertility. Infertility is a tricky situation because here a patient who the couple is planning an issue, and invariably the in-laws will bring the son-in-law to you saying that this chap is unable to provide the sperm. Now, it is important that you deal with the person, with the infertile person and his partner. Take out all the other people from the equation. This is a very personal issue. Evaluation and treatment is done only to the partner and the couple. So confidentiality is important. And in my opinion, communication is extremely important, and it starts with your office. Once in your office, if you start communicating well and explain the procedure, then most of these negative outcomes are avoided. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ganesh. I think that was very clear, and I think your message is quite clear as to what should be done and what has to be done in as far as your specialty and, of course, in general about medical legal aspects. I have a question to Dr. Ravi Shankar. I think this is mainly for our junior colleagues and our colleagues practicing in hospitals as well as in private practice. And we do notice that the professional indemnity is quite important to so-called protect us from litigation and the huge compensation claims that are being made against doctors. So what would you advise with regards to professional indemnity, and would you advise all practitioners to take it, and to the extent to which we should take it, should we take it for 10 lakhs or 50 lakhs or 1 crore? Seems to be the compensations are increasing by the day. So Dr. Ravi Shankar.
Yeah, the compensation amount granted against the hospitals is very high. I think everybody will be aware of it. It is a common fact that when a case is filed against a hospital, they always demand a very high compensation. And against the doctors, I don't think it is very high. The maximum judgment that came in this country was that Kunal Shah case, where the compensation awarded went about more than 5 odd crores. Initially, it was 40 lakhs for the consultants, and finally it got reduced to 10 lakhs. Of course, today in a super specialty, like our Jay Sir's orthopedics or the Madam Vijayalakshmi Madam's obstetrics and gynec, I think it is better to have a 1 crore coverage per year so that you practice your profession peacefully. That's very much needed. See, for that 1 crore, you're going to spend few thousands, and you're going to be comfortable with that big coverage. and you might take a risk on certain patients if you have the confidence that you've come through successful in those cases. So I think in those specialty, like Jay sir said, the obstetrics, the orthopedics, the plastic surgery, and all these people should have a coverage of at least 1 crore. And then the hospital should have multiple crores coverage. Today, the IMA is able to provide in the multiples of 10,000, 10 lakhs coverage. The indemnity scheme, which we started way back in 1995 on 95, 96 onwards. That's how I am into this litigations and coverage of doctors and trying to educate them. So the coverage for an individual doctor in a specialty for a year, 1 crore is very, very ideal today, where you can practice peacefully. And for a hospital, it has to be multiple crores. Then only you can see that all your consultants are covered somewhere. And today, if you want to take a consultant into your establishment, you need to get not only their medical registration certificate, denoting their specialty qualification, which is registered in the respective medical councils. Also try to get the indemnity policy copy from them, so that tomorrow your institution will not be liable for the problems that he has done it. Though the court may give a judgment clearly demarking what is the compensation that has to be paid from the hospital, from the consultant level. Let us be safe. It is a safe and defensive practice that one should have a indemnity policy. If they're risking it and taking it as 10 lakhs, it's quite comfortable. But then if you have 10 lakhs, you always have something hitting on your brain when you're trying to work on a complicated case. When you are going to be a trauma surgeon, when you're trying to operate on those vital organs, ophthalmology, on the brain, on the heart, on the bones, I think you need a very good coverage to have a comfortable and peaceful practice.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Nirmal, I have a question for you.
Just one interruption, Murali.
Yes, sir.
I would also say that from what Ravi Shankar said, I think is SMF, as far as I know, the only hospital where once you come in as, join as a full-time or part-time, you are actually covered. The hospital takes care of all your, litigation. I don't know how many of you know that, or how many other hospital actually has this practice.
Most hospitals ask the consultants to show their indemnity policy, sir.
That's what I'm telling. In SMF, that's something different. So
that's why we said SMF is a benchmark for everybody to run an establishment.
Thank you.
Dr. Nirmal, the question, I think we're running short on time, so I'm going to ask you a quick question. We do find that most of the time the litigation and problems arise. For example, I have treated somebody, I do a different kind of treatment. It can be urology, it can be orthopedics, it can be ophthalmology. I do find that when they go for a second opinion to another doctor, to another specialist, they do find that the casual comment or a sarcastic remark like, is this the way it was done, or this is the way it should not have been done. And so this casual comments actually cause problems to the practitioner and confuses the patient and makes the patient maybe go towards the litigation. Your take on that?
Yeah, thanks, Murali. Thanks for highlighting this. Most of the medical legal problems starts with another competitor or professional in your area, or when the patient goes for second opinion. I think it's mandatory that we sensitize our colleagues on this professional jostling, either by words or by their body language. The patients are very curious to see your facial reaction or how you react seeing the patient. And now many of the patients I see have recordings. Secretly, they record the video or audio recording when they go for second or third opinion. So we have to be really careful about what we talk to the patient, particularly when we are seeing a professional colleagues' patients. And if you're giving second opinion, always better to document properly that the case was seen by another professional and you are giving a second opinion, so that you can either mandate the original findings or it can add to the additional documentation. And in the medical association conference also, we have to sensitize our people that when they come across, we have to talk to the patients professionally and not comment on other work, because we don't know on what circumstances that particular surgery or particular procedure was carried out on the patients. For example, in ophthalmology, we have the common procedure cataract. the outcome varies in different hands with reference to the main etiology. Suppose patient would have had secondary glaucoma, patient would have had a zonular dialysis, pre-existing diseases. So all this should be taken care of whenever you comment on the patients. So ask about the pre-existing history. Better to ask for all the case records and imaging and diagnostic investigation beforehand. Then after examination, talk to the patient in a proper way, list out the problems and what is the probable opinion and what is the standard of care in this patient. So this is a way to give second opinion, and never put down your colleagues or your even if it's a competitor practice wherever you are giving your opinion.
Thank you, Nirmal. I think there's been a wonderful discussion. I think we can go on discussing various aspects of these topics. I think an hour obviously is not enough, and there's so much to discuss.
Yes.
We can consider this maybe an introductory webinar, and there's more to come. So this is more like a trailer for the medical legal aspects of practice in the future. And I think Dr. Thomas Kuruvilla is here with us, and he is our Deputy Medical Director as well as Director of Academics in SMF. I would like him to say a few words, and with that we will wind up this webinar.
Yeah, it has been a very interesting webinar. Now the thing is, only one thing I want to add. What I've done in pediatrics is we are always honest with the patient. If there's a problem, we tell them there's a problem. And we tell them this happened or this didn't happen. And I think if we are upfront with the patient and honest, very often, even if there's a mistake, most patients are graceful and they tend to give us that extra bit of leeway. I don't know how it works in the other departments. But anyway, that is just a little bit I wanted to contribute. And it has been a very interesting seminar, like Murli said, and I think we can use this for forum this year, because this is a very useful and interesting topic, and we can do it on a larger scale. Yeah. Can we close, Dr. J?
Yeah, please. If Murli says okay, we'll close. I think it's about time.
I think we all have to get back to our work unless patients are waiting outside, start litigating for delay and making them wait.
Only thing is
Thank you, Murli.
ignorance about law is not an excuse that we need to understand.
Absolutely. I think that's what I have learned in the last year or so, that we cannot say that we do not understand the law. I think we have to make an attempt to understand the various legal provisions, and then of course sort of practice defensively in a way that we avoid the litigation rather than confront ourselves with a litigious situation. My sincere thanks to all the speakers. My sincere thanks to SMF management, Dr. Jaishankar, Dr. Thomas, for readily agreeing to give us this 1.5 hours of grand round time to this webinar. And of course, our panelists, Dr. Ravi Shankar, and my very close friend and ophthalmologist, Dr. Nirmal Frederick, Dr. Ravi Shankar from the IMA, Dr. Ganesh Kamath. Thank you all. Thank you one and all for this very extremely useful and session on medical legal practice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Murli. Good show.
Thank you, Murli. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
Thank you.